The tray slipped, the cups shattered, and the hall of polished marble snapped to attention as laughter broke like a tide against the columns. A guard barked for her to be removed, the Sheikh flicked 2 fingers as if sweeping a shadow from his table, and the guests leaned in to enjoy the spectacle of a maid on her knees. Then she spoke in the hush that follows mockery, her voice shaped in the old desert cadence only the elders use, repeating a proverb attributed to the Sheikh's grandfather. For a heartbeat the room forgot how to breathe. The guard's hand froze inches from her shoulder. The Sheikh, who had not lifted his eyes all evening, finally looked at the woman who had just put a leash on the room with a single sentence. Miriam was not impressive to look at. Dust softened her plain sandals. The slate abaya did not fit, and the name tag had been written by a pen that was tired of being useful. She moved with the neat economy of someone who had learned to make herself smaller than furniture. Yet her hands did not shake as she gathered porcelain teeth from the floor. She pressed a cloth over the spreading stain, patient as a surgeon with a wound that could not bleed. A head waiter muttered that training had standards. An advisor with new money's grin told the nearest guest that the palace hired anyone these days. Miriam kept working until the carpet forgave the accident and the cups lay stacked like quiet apologies on her tray. She did not ask for permission to stand. She rose because the job required it and carried the broken pieces into the kitchen where heat and noise lifted the ceiling. Amal, the head cook, did not need to be told what had happened. The kitchen has its own intelligence, the kind that travels on steam and eyes. Amal placed a new tray on the counter, set 2 porcelain pots upon it, and advised sweetness for the guests and bitterness for the Sheikh. Miriam washed her hands, watching the water carry away the dust. She thought of her father measuring long nights by the sound of wind combing sand. He had said that patience is not silence, it is a rope. The ones who pull without looking always end up on the ground. Back through the service door, Miriam moved along the long table, filling glasses and cups, her presence the quiet rhythm that keeps an orchestra in time. She began with the visiting minister, then approached the head of the table where the Sheikh kept a circle of unbothered space around him. He took his coffee without acknowledgement. Miriam leaned a fraction closer, enough for a private exchange that looked like nothing from a distance, and repeated the proverb in the same antique register, naming the grandfather and the year. He had used it during a border meeting that is now a story people tell to make themselves taller. Something changed in the Sheikh's stillness. He placed a finger upon his prayer beads and turned one slowly, a measured gesture that did not belong to boredom. The advisor with fashionable stubble did not enjoy the turn in air. He cracked a lazy insult about servants who think poetry is a promotion, making sure the nearby guests could hear him. Miriam met his eyes for a single second and then moved on with the smile of someone who can carry a tray and an insult at the same time. She did not hurry. She did not shrink. She filled cups as if everyone at the table were equally thirsty. The stubble advisor returned to his phone, tapping a message to a number that had paid for his suit. The guard closest to the Sheikh watched Miriam the way a hawk considers wind. Speeches rose and fell, those long arrangements of words that pretend to be action. Miriam floated at the edge of sound, close enough to attend, far enough to vanish when needed. The room smelled of cardamom and old furniture polish. The chandelier held 1,000 small suns over a scene that wanted to be important. Behind the staged brightness, she heard the friction of real plans being rubbed together at the end of the table. 2 men thought the music would cover them, but desert ears are trained to find meaning in noise. One voice used a dialect from the coast, brisk and clip. The other was the stubble advisor, lower now, talking about an after-midnight route change, a convoy, and a crate that would move under his signature. Miriam did not turn her head. She noted the rhythm of the words, the time, the direction whispered like a shrug. She poured tea for a pair of oilmen who called her sister in the way people use the word to make themselves feel generous. She returned to the head of the table and stood where only the Sheikh could hear her if he wanted to. She observed that the floor had grown proud tonight. he asked, without moving his lips, whether floors could be proud. She said that footprints tend to forget what carries them until someone lights a mat. His bead clicked once against the next. He glanced at the stubble advisor and then at the guard with the square jaw. It was not a signal, not yet. It was the cataloging of a new variable. The minister raised his glass, the room applauded, and the moment folded into applause so neatly that anyone who tried to examine it later would find only the lines where it had been cut. The rest of the service passed as a ledger of small humiliations that Miriam paid with steady hands. A lawyer thanked her with a wink that did not include gratitude. A guest instructed her as if she were a piece of furniture that had not read the manual. An older woman with jewels like winter sunlight pressed a coin into Miriam's palm with the kind of pity that tastes like salt. Miriam accepted the coin, later placed it in the kitchen tip jar, and returned to the hall with the same neutral grace. She had long ago learned that contempt is a kind of weather. You dress for it and keep moving. As the guests dispersed into little storms of laughter and cologne, the Sheikh rose. He did not make speeches. He did not perform gratitude. He walked as if walking were a sentence that ended in a period. Miriam stepped out of his path. He paused without looking at her and adjusted the cuff of his jacket by a quarter inch. The guard with the square jaw fell in behind him, and everyone else remembered a reason to be somewhere else. Only as he reached the archway did he say, almost as if to the doorframe, that the east entrance sometimes forgets the faces of those who belong. He added that it would remember a certain one at sunrise. The words were placed in the air like a card slid under a door. Miriam did not smile until the corridor swallowed the last echo of shoes. Amal met her by the kitchen with a look that asked and answered at the same time. Miriam said that the floor had tried to teach her a lesson and learned one instead. Amal replied that lessons are expensive and someone had just offered to pay. Miriam washed the last cup until it shone like a small moon and set it to dry. When she finally stepped into the night, the palace lights threw perfect rectangles onto the courtyard, and beyond the walls the city hummed its restless song. She walked home along the edge of those rectangles, keeping to the narrow band where light meets dark, and thought about how a day can tilt on a single word spoken in the right voice at the right time. She did not think of revenge. She thought of thresholds. Sunrise arrives whether the door is open or not. Some doors open because a key turns, some because a guard is told a name, and some open because the person waiting in front of them has decided that waiting is over. At sunrise the east entrance looked like a closed book. 2 junior guards in mirrored sunglasses stood with the comfortable authority of men who believed doors obeyed them out of love. Miriam approached in her plain sandals and slate abaya, carrying nothing but the careful way she held herself. One guard lifted a hand like a gate and smiled as if he were giving a gift. "Staff use the service lane," he said, tilting his chin toward the alley where delivery trucks rumbled. She answered with a small, courteous nod that contained more patience than apology. "The service lane is for cargo," she said softly. "Today I am a message." They laughed, the quick, brittle laugh of men showing an audience how to treat a stranger. A breath later the guard with the square jaw, last night's hawk, stepped from the shadow of the arch. His gaze found Miriam's face, and for the first time since the palace was stone and not rumor, the east door opened inward for a maid. The junior guards fell silent so fast the morning breeze seemed loud. Inside, cool corridors smelled of lemon oil and old carpet. A protocol aide with a clipboard like a small shield intercepted Miriam and offered a plastic smile that had been rehearsed in mirrors. "The Sheikh is not available to support staff," she said, parking Miriam on a bench near a palm in a brass pot. "Someone will redirect you back to housekeeping." The word redirect made people sound like traffic. Miriam folded her hands in her lap and studied the lines of the tiled floor as if reading a map assembled from patience and grout. On the aide's clipboard, a corner of vellum peeked from under papers, a permit with a wax seal in a color a shade off from the palace's official scarlet. "Bad forgeries forget how colors age." She let the knowledge settle and said nothing. Sheikh time was a tide that obeyed the moon of his attention. The guard with the square jaw returned and nodded once. The aide began to protest on reflex and stopped when the nod included her. In the small majlis, morning light broke across low cushions and brass tables like thin water. The sheikh sat with one ankle on a knee, prayer beads coiled, a man arranging stillness the way others arrange weapons. He did not ask how she slept. He asked her to repeat exactly what she had heard the night before and how she had heard it while pouring tea. She gave him the words without embroidery, their rhythm, the coastal dialect that clipped its endings, the number that sounded like a time, and the phrase, "on my signature." When she finished, he turned a bead with his thumb, slow as an hour hand, and asked what the floor had told her this morning. "That pride hates echoes," she said. "And that whoever changed the convoy's path forgot the gate remembers every tire." The advisor with the fashionable stubble entered without knocking, because men who climb by shortcuts don't learn doors. He carried a phone and a smirk and the mood of someone rehearsing victory. "Your Highness," he said, "the minister's people confirmed the convoy arrived at the depot. All routine. Nothing to waste a morning on." He flicked a quick, insulting glance at Miriam, the kind of look that erases. Perhaps housekeeping misplaced a rumor. She did not return the look. "Rumors stack like dishes," she said calmly. "You don't notice the crack until someone tries to pour." The smirk faltered into annoyance. The sheikh let silence lean its weight on the room. He told the square-jawed guard to send a team to the depot and to the old coastal road 2 kilometers north, the one hunters favored when they wanted to leave tracks that looked like someone else's. It was not common knowledge where old caravan routes hid beneath asphalt, but knowledge has a way of living in people who carry water farther than their names. Miriam stepped to a low table and lifted a linen coaster, tracing with her finger an invisible line from the storage yard, skirting formal checkpoints, skimming the edge of the fish market where trucks could rinse their scent away. "They will avoid payment booths," she said, "and favor the lane beside the dried reed bed. There is a place where the sand keeps secrets worse than men do." The stubble advisor laughed too loud. "The tea girl draws maps now." The sheikh studied the imagined line and said nothing, which meant everything. He sent 2 guards with quiet orders and told the advisor to sit, which felt like pulling a leash. While the palace shifted into its slow sprint, the house manager discovered Miriam in the wrong wing and delivered a lecture with the efficiency of a tax. "You are staff," he said. "Staff wait where staff belong." He assigned her to refresh the guest suites left in a post-banquet mess. The assignment was punishment disguised as schedule. Miriam accepted it with the grace of someone who knew that sometimes the fastest way forward is to clean the room you did not dirty. In Suite 4 she stripped linens while 2 junior planners gossiped on a sofa about contracts and a crate so ordinary that it traveled under the radar of suspicion. "His signature gets anything through," one said, tapping a screen with reverence. The screen reflected a symbol in a corner, 3 small chevrons nested like teeth. When the planners left, Miriam found an invitation wedged under a chair leg, its wax seal the same wrong shade she had seen on the clipboard. She pressed it between paper towels and slipped it into her apron pocket. Evidence is humble when it wants to survive. Downstairs, the kitchens ran like a heart. Amal slid a plate of flatbread and dates across the counter and told Miriam to eat standing up like a thief who had nothing to be ashamed of. "They opened a door for you," Amal said, crushing mint with a practiced bruise. "Be careful who tries to shut it." Miriam chewed, drank water, and listened to the cooks argue about cumin and memory. When Amal's radio crackled with guard chatter, words breaking into static and rejoining as orders, Miriam caught enough to know the team had found 2 sets of tracks at the reed bed, one real, one meant to be admired. Whoever planned the route believed in camouflage but not in persistence. Sand is patient. It memorizes mistakes. The square-jawed guard reappeared with a pace that made the kitchen seem too small. He asked Miriam to come, which was not a request kitchen hierarchies recognized, but the way he asked made the room organize itself around the choice. In a side corridor near the laundry doors, the air smelled of soap and something metallic trying not to exist. A cart heaped with linen moved a little too slowly for its weight. The woman pushing it wore a scarf and a story about overtime. Her vowels rolled like the coast. The guard's hand hovered near his radio. "If I stop her," he said quietly, "I spook the fish and they vanish." Miriam watched the wheels leave faint gray signatures on the tile. "Fish don't vanish," she murmured. "They find dark water." She stepped into the woman's path with the innocent authority of someone who belongs where work is happening. "They need this upstairs," she said, tapping the cart. "The Sheikh's suite. I'll help you load. We'll be faster together." The woman hesitated a heartbeat too long, then nodded, the calculation showing at the corners of her eyes. They turned the cart toward a service lift. The guard drifted with them, casual and close. At the lift, Miriam pressed the call button, then bent as if to tie a sandal strap and pressed her palm against the cart's side. Inside linen, something solid pushed back. Laundry does not push. The lift arrived, doors sliding open with a soft apology. Miriam stood and smiled at the woman. "Let me fix the top fold," she said, and lifted a corner cotton deep enough to show the edge of a wooden crate stamped with 3 small chevrons like teeth. The woman's breath snagged. The guard's radio clicked without sound. Miriam lowered the cloth with the same calm she used for pouring tea. "Heavy sheets," she said, voice light enough to float. The guard's hand moved, not toward his weapon but toward the lift's emergency stop. In the minute that followed, the corridor filled with a choreography of quiet competence. 2 more guards materialized from nowhere, the woman's wrists found themselves held without bruises, and the cart rolled not to the street but to a storage room where doors closed softly on loud secrets. The crate emerged with the reluctant thud of a lie caught mid-sentence. The seal on the manifest matched the wrong scarlet. The signature matched the advisor's name with a flourish like a grin. The Sheikh arrived without entourage, a stillness that made the fluorescent lights seem ashamed. He looked at the crate, then at Miriam, then at the guard with the square jaw. No one spoke for a long 10 seconds. Finally the Sheikh touched the wooden stamp with one finger, as if reading Braille for intent, and said, "Some people forget the desert keeps receipts." He glanced once more at Miriam. Not approval, not yet. Recognition of a variable that had proven itself twice in 12 hours. As the guards lifted the crate to weigh its truth, the laundry corridor seemed to hold its own breath, listening for the moment a quiet woman would stop being a shadow and start being a story. They pried the lid just enough to look responsible and not enough to spill secrets, and at first the crate was innocent. Folded linen filled the space with the smugness of a lie that thinks it has won. The advisor with fashionable stubble exhaled a laugh meant for everyone in the room. He clucked his tongue at the square-jawed guard like a teacher who had caught a child pretending to read. "Routine supplies," he said. The wrong scarlet on the manifest dried into official-looking certainty on his face. Miriam did not look at him. She leaned over the crate and breathed in. Laundry smells like soap and air. This smelled like sap and panic. She tapped a corner with a coin from Amal's tip jar. The sound thudded and then, 3 inches left, it rang. Wood has a different voice when it lies. She asked for a knife, and pressed the blade along the grain where new glue had hurried to look old. The guard slid the knife into her palm, as if it were normal to hand a blade to a maid. She worked slowly, patient as a locksmith, easing a thin door away from a thinner truth. Under the linen sat a compartment the size of a suitcase, 3 small chevrons burned into the wood with the care of someone who wanted a signature without a name. The advisor spoke too quickly about old markings on vendor crates and supply chain eccentricities. Miriam lifted one edge of a wrapping and found an object shaped like shame. It was a ceremonial dagger missing from a museum case 3 months ago, the news stories full of guilt without proof. Beside it rested a ledger bound in rawhide, the pages smelling of dust and temptation. She did not touch the ledger. She pointed with her eyes. The Sheikh looked at the dagger, then at the symbol, then at the advisor, who discovered he did not like being looked at. The radio on the guard's shoulder hissed a warning about vehicles clustered at the north gate and cameras like curious birds. An anonymous tip, the voice said. A rumor that the palace held contraband. The advisor recovered his smirk and suggested that housekeeping take responsibility for the cart that had clearly gone off route. He proposed a quick private disposal to spare the Highness embarrassment. The Sheikh's jaw settled into stillness, that particular kind of quiet men wear when deciding if they will break something or elevate it. Miriam said the corridor had ears and the gate had eyes and the crate had a heartbeat. They all listened. Under the linen, faint and regular, a ping threaded the air. Not sound exactly. A pressure in the silence. She asked for a bread knife, not because it cut better but because the serrations could find a wire without breaking it. The square-jawed guard understood and brought one without asking why. They lifted the linens carefully and found a finger-sized cylinder taped beneath a slat, a tracker meant for delivery and disaster. If the crate passed through the palace long enough for a photograph, the shape of the story would harden in the cruel cement of headlines. Miriam suggested they move the crate somewhere the signal would die without harm. The Sheikh told the guard to take it to the old archive room with its thick walls and copper mesh in the plaster left from a time when radios were mischievous. The advisor objected with professional concern and was ignored so thoroughly that the ignoring felt like an injury. In the quiet that followed, the Sheikh asked Miriam who taught her to hear glue and lies. She could have pretended it was luck. Luck is a soft, convincing coat that looks good on people like her. She did not wear it. She loosened the knot at her wrist and turned back a slim leather band the color of burned reeds. 3 tiny stitches on the inside, arranged in a triangle, had faded to the color of old tea. She said her father was Hamdan the path fixer, the man who drew maps in people instead of paper, the one who stood in the Sheikh's grandfather's tent and swore the oath of those who keep roads honest. She recited the oath in the register people use to speak to graves. The room seemed to take a step back. The square-jawed guard's eyes flashed with the "you have got to be kidding me" of a soldier who just learned the plot is bigger than the mission. The Sheikh went still in a different way, not danger quiet this time but recognition quiet, like seeing a photograph you did not know existed of someone you love. He had believed Hamdan died without leaving a second line. People like Hamdan are often survived by stories and nothing else. He asked where the man had gone. Miriam said a border night took him, and the report called him helpful to smugglers because it is easier to bury a man if you weigh him down with the wrong nouns. Before the desert turned his bones into something calm, he taught his daughter to read wood with her knuckles and to hear when metal pretended to be laundry. She did not add that she had taken the job at the palace to stand a little closer to the center of the weather that had once washed her family away. She did not have to. The Sheikh's eyes said he had done the arithmetic. The radio crackled again. The vehicles at the north gate had multiplied. The anonymous tip now had a badge attached to it. Some officials wear sincerity like a shield. Others wear it like a costume. The advisor cleared his throat and pitched a new story, a test of staff integrity that had gone well, congratulations all around, perhaps a press release about internal vigilance, and certainly an immediate release of the woman who had stopped the cart so nobly back to her proper duties. The Sheikh did not look at him. He asked Miriam what to do next. The question hung in the air, a simple shape wearing a crown. She said the crate should remain sealed except where they had opened it, that chain of custody matters to people who like to argue in rooms with microphones, that a second decoy crate should be sent to the gate with nothing inside but towels and the wrong scarlet, and that the advisor who signed the manifest should be the one to carry it personally to greet the officials who were so interested in being helpful. It was not a plan born of revenge. It was born of the stubborn geometry of fairness. The Sheikh considered the angles and nodded. He told the square-jawed guard to build the decoy and to assign a team that knew when not to speak. He turned to the advisor and asked with soft courtesy that he present the palace's cooperation at the north gate. The advisor accepted with the expression of a man who had been handed a rope and asked to demonstrate his knot-tying skill. While the palace rebalanced itself, Miriam took the invitation with the wrong scarlet from her apron and placed it on the table alongside the ledger she still had not touched. She said that seals fade differently depending on how long they have been hiding. The wrong color meant a fresh lie. The ledger could wait. The gate could not. They moved like a small storm through corridors that smelled of lemons and secrets. In the old archive room, the copper mesh in the walls hummed like a memory of thunder. The tracker's heartbeat stuttered and thinned, then gave up. The dagger lay on the table like a question mark waiting for a story that fit. The Sheikh finally touched the rawhide cover of the ledger and opened it to the first page without looking down. He asked Miriam to stand beside him and read what he could not see yet. The alphabet was neat, the numbers tidy, the signatures varied. Halfway down the second page, she found the pattern people make when they believe no one is watching. The convoy at the north gate rolled forward under a sun sharp enough to peel paint. Officials in pressed suits clustered around the decoy crate as if gravity itself had summoned them. Cameras blinked and officials whispered about accountability, about vigilance, about how the palace had nothing to hide. The advisor with fashionable stubble forced a grin too wide, carrying the crate himself as if eager to star in his own redemption. The moment the lid came off, towels stared back at the crowd like folded witnesses. Laughter crackled through the officials, first polite, then sharp, then turning like wolves scenting weakness. One muttered about wasted time, another about theatrics, and a third scribbled a note that looked like a death warrant in ink. The advisor's grin snapped into shards. He tried to stammer an explanation about switched manifests, about innocent confusion, about how zeal sometimes resembled guilt. His words dropped into sand. No one bent to pick them up. Inside the palace, the real crate sat heavy in the copper-walled archive room. The Sheikh studied the dagger laid across the rawhide ledger, while his guards circled silent as shadows. Miriam stood at the table, her plain abaya dusted from a corridor she had walked 1,000 times but never as herself. She read more of the ledger in a low, steady voice. Names, transactions, routes. Each page was a skeleton key to doors no one was supposed to open. 3 chevrons marked every deal, stitched into the margins like a private brand. At the bottom of one page the flourish ended not in ink, but in a fingerprint smudged with oil. The Sheikh bent close and recognized what only blood knows. It was the advisor's own. He set his prayer beads down one by one, like verdicts. By noon, the officials had departed from the gate with empty hands and half-satisfied smirks, but whispers already slithered through the city. Rumors move faster than cars. The advisor returned pale, stripped of swagger, his phone trembling in his palm like a bird desperate to escape. He demanded an audience, claiming sabotage, daring to accuse Miriam by name. He spat the word made as if it were dirt. Miriam did not flinch. She folded her hands and listened. When he finished, the Sheikh asked him why his scarlet wax did not match the old seals. Why his signature bent into chevrons on ledgers that predated contract. Why a tracker hummed under a laundry cart he himself had cleared for passage. Each question was a stone. By the third, the advisor was already buried. The Sheikh raised a hand and guards stepped forward, not with fury but with the calm inevitability of law. They took him down the marble corridor where echoes last longer than footsteps. His protests splintered into silence. The palace breathed easier, as if walls could sigh. Miriam remained still by the ledger, aware that silence is often louder than shouting. The Sheikh turned toward her at last. His gaze was not soft, but it was the kind of gaze men reserve for equals they did not expect to find in plain clothes. "You carried my grandfather's oath without ever demanding my ear," he said. She inclined her head, answering with a quiet that acknowledged both the burden and the choice. He told the guard with the square jaw to record her name on the rolls of trusted staff, not as maid but as consultant to the Majlis. The word consultant hung in the air like a banner freshly unfurled. No one missed its meaning. In one night and one dawn, a shadow had become a voice. That evening the palace resumed its rhythm of banquets and bargaining, but the laughter that once cut her like glass now hesitated when she passed. The cooks in the kitchen pressed fresh bread into her hands with conspiratorial pride. Amal winked and muttered that ghosts had their uses after all. Guards at the east entrance stepped aside without question. Even the carpets seemed to soften under her feet, no longer proud enough to trip her. When she walked past the hall where she had once knelt to gather broken porcelain, conversation paused for a breath too long, as though the marble itself remembered. Later, the Sheikh called her to a smaller room where only lamplight watched. He asked her what to do with the ledger, whether to burn it for safety or keep it as a blade against men who mistake power for permanence. Miriam traced the edge of a page, and said fire destroys proof, but also warmth. Better to hide it where proof can sleep until called. She suggested a vault beneath the old well, the one travelers once threw coins into for luck. The Sheikh studied her for a long time, then smiled with one corner of his mouth, an expression rare enough to feel like a sunrise. He agreed. The ledger would rest under stone and water, guarded not by locks but by memory. When Miriam stepped out into the courtyard, the night air smelled of jasmine and dust. The city hummed beyond the palace walls, full of voices that did not know a maid had bent history by listening harder than liars spoke. She looked at her hands, at the faint lines etched by work no one valued until now. She thought of her father's words, that patience is a rope, and she felt how tightly it had pulled her here, to a place where patience turned into strength. Tomorrow there would be more laughter, more tests, more people eager to mock. But tonight the guards opened the door for her without being told. Tonight she walked through not as cargo, not as shadow, not as servant. She walked as someone the desert itself might remember. For those who had been underestimated, ignored, or mocked, her story whispered a truth as old as sand. Dignity does not need armor. Silence does not mean weakness. And sometimes the smallest voice in the room carries the weight to change the world, if only it speaks at the right moment. The city awoke the next day to rumors that felt heavier than stone. Whispers threaded through the souks, in the markets, in coffee stalls where men leaned too close. They said a crate had been stopped at the palace. They said an advisor had vanished into silence. They said a maid had walked through a door where servants never tread. Truth and rumor braided themselves until no one could tell them apart, but everyone repeated them anyway. In the palace the air felt different. Guards who once looked through Miriam now glanced at her as if she carried invisible rank. Ministers nodded too quickly when she passed, their courtesy the nervous kind, like men who shake hands with storms. But respect is never given freely without envy. By midday, the wives of two high officials cornered her in the marble corridor outside the guest suite. They wore silks that whispered with every step and perfumes that fought each other like rival queens. Their eyes raked her like talons dulled by habit but sharpened by disdain. One said that it was amusing how quickly servants dreamed themselves important. The other smiled a smile made for cutting. A maid who listens too closely, she said, is still a maid. Miriam folded a towel in her hands, aligning its edges with patience. She replied softly that some towels become bandages when the time comes, and those who mocked them yesterday pray for them tomorrow. Their perfume soured. They swept away, trailing fabric like banners of retreat. In the kitchens Amal laughed until flour dusted her hair. You bleed them with words, she said, kneading dough with fists that knew both anger and love. Be careful, little shadow. Envy has sharper teeth than hunger. Miriam accepted the warning without fear. She had grown up among nights where the wind itself mocked, yet still she carried water farther than men thought possible. Silence was her weapon, patience her shield. She wrapped both around herself as tightly as her scarf. That evening the Sheikh summoned his council. Miriam was not invited but found herself standing at the edge of the chamber anyway, the square-jawed guard ushering her in without a word. The councillors shifted in their seats, uncomfortable at a servant's presence. Papers shuffled, voices rose, and arguments twisted around the dagger and the ledger like smoke around flame. Some urged concealment, others demanded denial. The Sheikh listened, fingers rolling beads with the patience of mountains. When silence finally fell, he asked Miriam what the floor thought. She met the eyes of men who had never lowered theirs to meet a maid. The floor, she said, remembers weight, not titles. It knows who walked with burden and who with lies. Her voice carried like water poured into stone. The chamber hushed. One counselor sputtered, another bit his lip, but the Sheikh nodded once, decisive as a verdict. Then the floor will be our witness, he said. With that, Miriam was no longer a visitor. She was part of the circle. The advisor with fashionable stubble never returned. His name dissolved from lips as if it had been sand blown away. The ledger went into the vault under the old well, guarded by locks of memory and loyalty. The dagger was sent back to the museum at midnight with no explanation. In the official record, nothing unusual had happened. But inside the palace, a door had opened that could never be closed. Miriam walked freely now, from kitchen to majlis, from corridors of marble to courtyards where jasmine trembled in the wind. The guards did not question her. The servants watched her with a mixture of awe and fear, whispering that she was either protected by fate or dangerous enough to be left alone. Weeks passed and the palace lived on routine, but the balance had shifted. Ministers chose their words more carefully. Guests poured their own drinks rather than risk her listening ear. The Sheikh alone seemed unchanged, calm in his stillness, aware that storms rearrange landscapes slowly. One evening he stopped her as she passed, his voice quieter than the sound of beads rolling. "Your father's rope of patience held longer than mine," he said. She inclined her head, letting the silence answer. "Do you know what I will do with those who mocked you that first night?" he asked. She shook her head. He smiled faintly. "Nothing. Their punishment is that they must remember how wrong they were every time they see the guards open the door for you." His words settled in the air like justice wearing plain clothes. Miriam never sought revenge. She sought only space to walk without stepping around contempt. The palace gave her that space now, and in return she gave it something rarer, truth carried without fear. She did not speak often, but when she did, silence bent to listen. Those who once dismissed her as shadow now found themselves reflected in her calm, and some did not like what they saw. Yet even envy could not undo what had been done. A maid had become a map had become a story, and a story had become something the desert itself would remember. When she finally returned home at night, the city felt smaller than before. Children still played in alleys, merchants still shouted prices, the same moon still climbed the same sky. But when she walked, people moved aside without knowing why. Respect sometimes travels faster than names. She thought of her father by the fire, telling her that shadows are proof of light. She smiled into the night and walked on, no longer mocked, no longer ignored. The rope of patience had pulled her through humiliation, through silence, through rooms that tried to forget her. Now it pulled her higher, where every underestimated soul could see. And to those souls, those who are overlooked, dismissed, or laughed at, her story leaves a single truth. Being mocked does not erase worth. Being silent does not mean powerless. The world may forget your name, but if you hold your ground with dignity, the day will come when doors open for you, not because of who you serve, but because of who you are.